is an important day as we continue to look back at Hurricane Katrina. It's been 20 years since the devastating storm just ravaged the Gulf Coast. This was not only one of the worst natural disasters that has hit our country, but also one of the most costliest, and in so many ways. We lost 1,800 people, so that's probably the biggest price tag, the one that we can never get back. But in terms of dollar damages, $125 billion worth of damage. The widespread destruction led to a humanitarian crisis, particularly in New Orleans. The city was left flooded after the levees protecting the city start to break down. I'd estimated that 80% of the city was actually left underwater after all of these levee failures, and the lasting impact of Katrina is still felt today by those that live in the city and also ones that left the city. Katrina has become an example of resiliency for the survivors and the perseverance of folks that had to get through real trauma as they move past the natural disaster.
The Coalition for Compassionate Schools at Tulane University has been taking lessons from Katrina to better support students during and after these disasters. Dr. Allisyn Swift, Executive Director of the Coalition, joins us now to discuss how schools have adapted after Katrina, because you imagine you have thousands of college students flocking to the area, families that are worried, and the traumatic event that really can come from something of Katrina's nature.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. You know, it can be hard to look back at storms like Katrina, but so important because there are lessons that have made us better moving forward.
Yes, indeed. So one, I think, of the biggest lessons that we have learned is that, mental health folks and mental health professionals are not necessarily the big doers in this, right? This was a community event. And during the events of Katrina, we saw community come together in very, very powerful ways. So one of the things that we emphasize here at the Coalition for Compassionate Schools are supporting communities, making sure that communities are healthy, making sure that communities can then be able to really help each other through literally weathering the storm. So some of the things that we do really are focused on the frontline workers that work directly with students, that is the teachers, the school leaders, making sure that they have what they need to respond, not only in the moment when crises happen, but also after a big event. And that means that they need to be taken care of too. So we do really emphasize whole community health and making sure that folks have what they need so that they can then help the students that might be going through any types of difficulty during this time. We also have to remember a lot of the students that we have now in schools were not alive during this time. A lot of them were born after the storm. And so for some of them, they may have vicarious trauma and lessons from their parents, but there's different ways that it can affect different children now. A beautiful piece that recently came out produced by Be Loud Studios is called Born After the Storm, and you can see it at bornafterthestorm.com. It's stories of children that were born after the storm, high school age children, that have went back and interviewed their parents and grandparents and family members that had lived through the storm. And some of them had never heard stories of the storm before. It was just too painful for families to talk about. Other of them have amazing stories about how community came together. Other of them have feelings of loss that they missed out on meeting and knowing certain family members at the time, living and seeing certain houses and experiencing certain events that happened due to the people that were lost during that time. So there's such a variety of ways that this is still affecting us right now.
It's that long-term effect. It's not just in the immediate months, but years, even a lifetime for somebody who is impacted by this, or generations that you can feel the impact of losing family members. For schools specifically in New Orleans, I mean, a lot of times when you have a natural disaster, you then go back to the drawing board. What could we have done better? What are some of the things that schools have put into place to then be better prepared for all types of disasters that New Orleans faces compared to 2005?
Well, one thing that schools have been really working on in the city is refining their crisis response plans, right? So we actually do help kids and parents and schools figure out what is the response after a crisis. And that, like I said, can look a variety of ways for a variety of people. But for right now, for schools, there's, of course, the immediate impact. How do we know where students are? How do we make sure that they have what they need? How do we know where and when we might need to intervene? And and that's on like the practical level. And then there's on the mental health level in terms of how we want to intervene for them and make sure that staff have what they need and make sure that students have what they need. But remember that just because an event happens does not mean that it's going to cause trauma, right? It's often what happens after the event, how we make meaning of the event, how the healing process begins post-event that can tell. So we're often told that like in the immediate aftermath, that's not necessarily when we need to like run in with all the mental health folks. Again, that's when we need to check that community has what it needs to be able to stabilize itself. One of the reasons why there's still lingering effects of Katrina is because the aftermath, what happened after the storm, families separated, levees breaking, property damage, people, passing, unfortunately. So all of those things that happen afterwards are really, and how people actually do make meaning of those processes are really what's going to be able to tell whether or not an event itself is going to be a long-lasting trauma. Just having a storm, just having a big weather event does not mean that it's going to cause trauma. It's what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
And so it's planning that goes into it.
So many important things to think about. Thank you so much for joining us today. That is Dr. Allisyn L. Swift joining us to talk about Katrina. And that conversation continues this evening. Don't forget to tune in to Fox Weather tonight at 8:30 p.m. as we continue our docu-series. So tonight is part 3, Katrina's Wrath 20 years later. And we're going to explore this conversation of the infrastructure and these valuable lessons that we have learned moving forward post-Katrina.